Kashrut, part 1. Okay. Okay, so this is going to, this lecture, no, we can't do the joke yet. So this series of lectures, or shiurim, will cover Hilchot Shabbat, the laws of Shabbat. This is going to be focused on the 39 Avot Melachot, which we'll look into in just a second. I think, honestly, we're probably going to take at least 5 classes, maybe more, because it's a lot of material. And there are many other topics related to Shabbat that we can discuss. I wanted to start off with a quote from Rabbi Yehonatan Eibschutz, who says, "One who does not thoroughly study the laws of Shabbat 3 or 4 times cannot avoid desecrating Shabbat, either with a Torah violation or a rabbinic violation. It is praiseworthy to constantly study the laws." And as we go through the lecture, you'll realize that it is extremely complicated if you want to adhere to a right-of-center Orthodox perspective. I'm not telling you should do that, but you need to know, you need to be exposed at least to many of these principles, at least for the sake of having interaction with Jews from different backgrounds. I also wanted to include a section from a very famous rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib, from the 19th century, the early 1800s, 1840s, or also known as the Safat Emet. We learn that tarnish and blemishes must be removed from metal utensils that are only to be rendered kosher, from the word only in the verse, only the gold and the silver, from Numbers 31:22. Similarly, only keep my Shabbatot in Exodus 31:13. This teaches us that one must free himself of his tarnish and blemishes before entering the sanctity of Shabbat. It's before the koshering process. So if No, you need to take tarnish off. You'd have to look at the specific case. If it's burned, I mean, if there's something additional on it, or if it's just something that's happened to the metal itself. You know, if it's just something that the metal has been bent or altered or something, that's not really the concern here. It's more, the specific context is like tarnish as it applies to silver or gold, you know, like you would use some kind of remover. But the point is that, you know, just as we are vessels, we want to remove all impurities from ourselves when we enter into Shabbat. So I think that most of you are familiar with some of the basics regarding the source of the melachot, and I actually put this at the end, and I wanted to, I probably did it too fast. Couple of passages in the Torah itself which give us the concept of melacha, because the word melacha is the word that is used in the Torah to describe creative work. It is not, okay, so for example, in Exodus 20:19 we read, V'yom hashevi'i Shabbat l'Adonai Elohecha lo ta'aseh chol melacha. All types of work, or all work, and the context is all types of creative work, which we'll look at in a second. Ata uvincha uvitecha avdecha ve'amatcha uvchemtecha ve'gerecha asher bish'arecha. But the 7th day is a Sabbath, or a Shabbat, unto the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any manner of work. Thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor the cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. Now, the other word that is used in the Torah for work is avodah. Avodah is a service. It's the type of service that is related to the Kohanim, for example, in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, or the Beit HaMikdash. So we're looking at a different type of work. We're looking at melacha. We're looking at creative work. And that's why the expansiveness of this is very challenging. Now, since we do not have the Torah explicitly defining what melacha is, the Rabbanim looked at different passages in the Torah to look at what the definition of melacha is. In Exodus 35, we are introduced to some basic laws of Shabbat, and then immediately after, the laws or the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, are discussed, are elaborated. So the rabbis, on the principle of juxtaposition, the positioning of the two sections, relate melacha as anything that was involved in the creative work of the Mishkan. In Exodus 36:6, I believe, it explicitly states that when people were donating to the building of the Mishkan, that people have donated so much that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tell the people not to bring any more. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, and I'll quote you that passage here, just to give you context. He says, and Moses gave orders, and they caused it to be proclaimed throughout the camp. Let no man or woman create any more work for the uplifted donation of the sanctuary. So in fact, in the Hebrew it says, "Ve'atzav Moshe ve'aviru kol b'machane le'emor ish ve'isha al ya'asu od melacha leterumat hakodesh v'yikaleh ha'am mechavi." So here in Exodus 36:6, we have an explicit connection between the concept of melacha as it relates to the Mishkan. Now, in the Talmud, in the Bavli, which is the Babylonian Talmud, in Shabbat, the whole tractate is dedicated specifically to what is malacha, what is prohibited. In 97b, there is a discussion, actually it should be 39, not 30, apologize for that, 39 categories of work. And these are referred to as the avot melachot. Avot is the word that we use for fathers, from the word av. And in this case, what it means is it's the father, it's the principal category. And then under that, there are subcategories. So there are 39 classes of work, and then each one has its own subcategory. Now, before we go back and start with specific melachot, I wanted to reference two other passages in the Tanakh, which give us an idea that even though the Torah itself does not specifically delineate what is work and what is not, with a few exceptions, there was an oral tradition that was apparently known by later generations, and this is proven in Jeremiah, and it's also proven in the book of Nehemiah. So in Jeremiah 17:21-22, we read, Ko amar Adonai ishmaru benafshotechem be'al tisu masa bayom hashabbat bechavetem be'sha'arei Yerushalayim. And then the second verse says, Velo totzi'u masa mivatechem beyom hashabbat vechol melacha lo ta'asu vekidashtem et yom hashabbat kasher tzivita et avotechem. And the translation thus says the Lord, take heed for the sake of your souls and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring in it by the gates of Jerusalem. And then the second verse 22 says, neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, neither do ye any work. And so we read, Bechol melacha, but hallow ye the Sabbath day as I commanded your forefathers. So here, even though the Torah specifically does not reference this, we have proof that by the time of the Nevi'im, the prophets, there was an understanding of what melacha was. The second biblical text, before we return back and look at the nitty-gritty of melachot, is found in Nehemiah 13:15-22. It was too much Hebrew, so I just put the English. And I'll read that. In those days saw I, Nehemiah speaking, in Judah, some treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in heaps of corn, lading asses therewith, also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, and I forewarned them in the day wherein they sold victuals. There dwelt men of Tyre also therein, who brought in fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil thing is this that ye do, and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring us all this evil upon us and upon the city? Yet ye bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut, and commanded that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. And 7 of my servants set I over the gates, and there should be no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day. So the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodge without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I forewarned them and said unto them, Why lodge ye about the wall? If ye do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath. So that's a few biblical passages as a basis. And now we'll go back to the very beginning. Sure. The what, I'm sorry? No, I don't believe it is. No, I think it's a chet, isn't it? I have to look at the. I'm sorry, I have to look at the. It is a chaf. Yeah, you're right. It's a mel. The root would be a chaf, but I don't think it's connected though. Yeah, it's a chaf. At the end? No. It's a chaf. Yeah. All right. So sorry about getting all the way up here. Okay. So now we're going to get into the 39 Avot Melachot. We're only going to be able to do about 6 or 7 because they're extremely complicated. And we need to, what I want to do is I want to show you the basic breakdown of each one of these. So the first one is Zeriah, which is where we get the word Zerah, or Zerah is a seed. So in the Talmud, in the Bavli, and in the Yerushalmi, there's a whole tractate called Zera'im, seeds. It's about planting. All of the different laws that are associated with agricultural production. So this is the way that we're going to break down each melacha. We're going to start off with the principle of the melacha, or the melacha. We're going to look at the melacha as it was related to in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. So we're essentially connecting it to the biblical text. And then we're going to look at what we call the Av melacha, the principle, the father melacha, the main one. And then we're going to break it down into the subcategories. So when we get to the toladot, or the tolados, in Ashkenazic pronunciation, this is the generations. These are the subcategories. So, because every melacha has its own categories. So that's why it gets very complicated. So the first thing is Zeriah, and the very basic principle is causing the growth of a plant. Now, why would we be concerned about that? Well, because in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, the frame of the Mishkan was covered with sheets that were made from animal skins. You think, well, what does that have to do with planting? Well, the skins were dyed various colors, and those dyes, in turn, were derived from plants. In addition, this planting is the Mishkan source for this malacha. So everything that was involved with the construction of the Mishkan, directly or indirectly, is classified as a melacha, as a creative work. So the principal prohibition is related to the sowing seeds, because the seeds would give forth plants, then the plants would be taken, and of course they would be boiled down or treated to give dye that would be used in treating the material that was going to be used in the Mishkan, and then later the Beit HaMikdash. Now there are 4 areas or actions that are considered similar to sowing of seeds. The first is planting an actual seedling or sapling. So if you have a little tree and you actually go and plant it, that is effectively considered to be similar enough to planting. The source for this is the Mishneh Torah, Shabbat 8.2. So I'm trying to give you sources throughout. The second is pruning, because it's related to the growth process of a plant. So if you have a guy, pruning, that's prohibited on Shabbat. Grafting, taking one branch and sticking it onto another, that's prohibited. All this is based on the Mishneh Torah. And then layering. And all of these are ultimately related back to the Bavli, the Talmud, but I'm just giving you a few sources. So if you're trimming, if you're pruning, if you're arranging a tree, a plant, etc., these are all specific prohibitions. On Shabbat, yes. Mm-hmm. It depends what type of fixing that you were doing. Layering, I think, is more like it's like a type of pruning, but trying to make a plant like a certain type of. It's going to be involved. They're all going to be related to cutting, that kind of thing. Arranging it, I believe, if they're already in water, it's not problematic. If you're taking them out and putting it into, well, you shouldn't pick it. That's one of the prohibitions that we'll see. Yeah. So no picking flowers on Shabbat. So toladot is the sons, if you will, the generations, the subcategories. So any action that improves a plant. So if you have your flower and you are effectively trying to improve it, let's say like you have your flower vase. If there's anything that you can do, if you could add food to it, that would be problematic. But this is not an issue if you're just sort of Well, rearranging that gets into another issue. So there's different issues there. So then the next one is preventing harm to vegetative growth. So if you're covering something, if you're protecting it, maybe there's a winter warning, something like that. That's something that is also prohibited because it's indirectly improving the condition that would allow the plant to grow. And we don't want to do that actively. If it happens on its own accord, that's fine. So halachic application. So every one of the melachot I've divided up into this. So in this particular case, it's a lot of information. The first thing is that you should not, and this should be seeds, one should not toss seeds or pits of fruits and vegetables. Let's say you're walking outside, you've eaten an apple or something, you don't want to throw it on the ground because technically you are planting seeds, right? And then, as we'll see later on, let's say your kids are running on the grass, they're actually pushing seeds into the ground. So actually they're almost as if they're plowing, so to speak. And this is, normative. The next thing is you should avoid eating and drinking in a garden, specifically for the same reason, since the remnants can fall down and cause inadvertent growth. Number 3, you should not use any water in the garden that flows along the ground and causes growth. So that's something that, most of these are not things that are going to happen consciously. A lot of these things happen unconsciously, but it's something that you need to be concerned about. If you're outside, you don't want to wash your hands over earth, even if there are no plants growing in it. So this is a protection against the fact that there may be a plant there. You may wash your hands, water goes on it, you're inadvertently giving food, if you will, to the plant and helping it grow. One should not place a pit into a cup of water, nor place a seed in a wet surface, since these can cause the seed to grow. So let's say, for example, that you've got a whole bunch of kids, like a B'nai Abraham, and you want to show your kid a science project on Shabbat, and you say, hey, I'm going to get a bean, and I'm going to wrap it in cotton, and just to keep them entertained. That's prohibited. Why? Because it will cause the bean to sprout, and you do not want to cause it to sprout. You don't want to do anything active. The next one, we should not place flowers that open in water into a vase with water. So if they're there before Shabbat, that's fine. But if you're doing something to promote that, or you're transferring them onto another vase, that's the problem. One should not change the water or add water to a vase of flowers, even if the flowers do not open in water. This is because the new water improves the flower and the flowers, and also because it's part of the it's the fences concept, right? We don't want to do anything that resembles that because we want to make sure not to violate the principle melacha. All right, so that was pretty simple. So now we get to charisha. So we have a picture here of some guy, old style plowing. So these are very practical, but in a modern world, it's like to turn over, I think, the ground. And then I'll go back and add the Hebrew eventually. It just it was quite a bit of time. So harisha is not just simple direct plowing. It's something that can happen indirectly, as we see by the picture of our sheep, because you can lead out sheep to pasture, and they can trample on the ground, and they're sort of cultivating it or getting it ready. So the principle of the malacha is preparing the earth for planting. So that's why we have direct plowing. We have sheep in the field. So in the Mishkan, and sorry about the spelling errors, Mishkan. Dyes used for skins that covered the Mishkan were used from vegetables. So plowing is the Mishkan source for this malacha. Most of these early malachot are all related to the dyeing process in the Mishkan. So the principal malacha is plowing a plantable field. So this includes every variation of that: plowing, tilling, cultivating, hoeing, any digging for the purpose of planting seeds. And that's one source is the Mishneh Torah, Shabbat. The melacha includes plowing with an animal. It also includes attaching the needed tools to the animal. So let's say that you're not planning to plow, but you have your horse or your ox or whatever, and you sort of hitch them up, ready to go, even though you're not intending to do so. That is prohibited. There's no reason for you to do that. So that's related to this malacha. Harisha, the toladot or the tolados of harisha include the following: removing sticks and stones from a field because you're improving the field, getting it ready for planting. Breaking up clumps of earth. You might do that with your feet. You might do that if you're running, etc. Manuring a field. And the picture that I showed on the previous slide of the sheep, if the sheep go into the field, they're probably going to be eating and they're going to be processing manure. Now, if your intent is to take advantage of that, you're violating it because you are taking it. You know that they're going to do that, and you're getting the field ready for planting. If the intention is to plant. Now, some people that are stricter, they won't run on grass. If that is, because that might be an indirect effect. But I mean, there's not really an issue for the most part here. So what? Yeah. In a stricter community, maybe running on, grass might be an issue. You would want to do it. Well, I'm not saying that they wouldn't run, but I mean, they might be more conscious. Yeah, they might be more conscious of that. And there are different communities. Everyone's going to have stricter levels, etc. But that's something that you should be aware of. Yeah, and they're not. Yeah, but walking is one thing. If you're running, that's like a different category. So. Yeah, but it's not the intent to break it. But if you're running, the chances are that it will happen more. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know that it would be a minchag. I would, for that particular community, it would have the weight of halacha. But there might be different interpretations. Some people, it's a different topic. We'll get to that. But we would, some people allow people to ride bicycles on Shabbat, and some people don't. So, but they're all derived from the same source. But I wouldn't say it's just customary. It wouldn't, yeah. So, manuring the field. And then digging irrigation ditches. Now, this would be something that a child would do. If it's muddy outside and they take a stick, they're making lines in the dirt because they want to see the water run. That would be something that would be technically prohibited. So. Huh? Well, technically speaking, I mean, any child that's 3 or below, they're not bound to the mitzvot, right? The idea is that the parent is telling them as they grow up, that you shouldn't do that, etc. So, all right. So let's look at some of the halachic applications, which gets back to Penina's. Penina always anticipates the the issue. Rubbing the ground. If you're rubbing the ground, that's technically an issue. Now, a person should not rub his shoe on unpaved ground. You want to rub your shoe, knock yourself out on the pavement. The Rama is Rabbi Moses Israelis, so he's commenting on the Shulchan Aruch. And this is an opinion that he gives, which is, Ashkenazim would be very focused on that. Playing marbles on unpaved ground. Now you can say, well, that's extreme. It doesn't matter. We just have to look at, because the marbles will make paths. So mini irrigation ditches. So again, this is from the Rama. Cleaning the yard. A person should not sweep unpaved ground. Again, because you're improving the soil. This is from the Shulchan Aruch. Cleaning the house. One may sweep inside houses and other paved areas. But there's a different issue that becomes of concern if you have a traditional, old-style broom. And that is that a soft bristle broom should be used. Should be used to avoid breaking the straw, which violates the prohibition on breaking a utensil. Well, it could happen to any. I mean, it's valid for any. The prohibition is valid for any type of straw or plastic straw. The issue is not breaking it. So the same thing, actually, if I remember correctly, is actually toothbrushes. There's a different melacha. It's called memachek. It's smoothing skin. But if you think about it, when you brush your teeth, you're smoothing the surface of the teeth. So there are some Orthodox that don't brush your teeth, and there are some Orthodox that do, but they use a soft, a soft brush. Okay. So then the last one, technically, I mean, again, some of these they're not applicable because most people will not find themselves. But if you were in a third world country, maybe technically washing the floor should not be done in the house as a means of preventing washing an unpaved floor. So maybe if you lived in a different part of the world, that actually might be a concern. Can we take a break? I need to go to the restroom. Yeah, sorry. Do we need to pause it or anything like that? Need to pause it for a second? No? Okay.
But in this context, it means the subcategory. Yeah, the sub-metaphor of the parent mode. You can have a generational rule or generational.
Okay, so now we're back. So now we're getting to Kitsira. Did I have a picture for that one? Oh, I did not. Wait a minute. Oh, I forgot a picture for that one. I'll add that later. So this is like harvesting. This is the word that we derive from Kitsir, I believe. Pulling out a plant or a fruit from its place of growth, even if you have the intention of eating it. This would be, according to halacha, would be prohibited. So the melacha, as related to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, is as follows. The dyes that were used for the skins that covered the Mishkan were derived from vegetables. The plants used for making the dyes had to be taken from the ground. So again, you see that this is the third melacha that is related to the dyeing process in the tabernacle. So the Ab melacha, the principal or the father, if you will, of this particular melacha, is cutting a plant or fruit from its place of origin using a sickle or any tool used to remove it from its original place of growth. So what would be a practical application today? If you're outside in the fruit tree or something like that and you grab an apple, even if you're going to eat it, you're breaking the connection, you're harvesting. So this is something that is prohibited. Well, shame on you for being lost in Shabbat. That's the first thing. No, it's good. No, but I mean, there's always. And I mean, if you want to look at that specific example, the halachot were in, I would suggest, not, I wouldn't say necessarily as defined, but there were a lot of back and forth on some of the details of melachot at that time. So, Yes, yeah. So, but in any case, there were many different opinions regarding, if you're eating at that moment, if you're picking something. But yeah. So if you're lost in the woods, that's a different category. I believe that there are different opinions, but I don't remember offhand. Yes, but all this is This is also from the Mishnah Berurah. These are all, from the Mishnah Berurah is the source, the halachic source that Ashkenazim use today as the definitive basis for halacha. The Shulchan Aruch is the definitive source that Sephardim and many Hasidim and so forth use. Although sometimes Hasidim have other things that they use as well. And there's other halachic codes, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Shulchan Aruch. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're only dealing with situations that you're at home, normal Shabbat situations. Okay, so now the next one is if you have a flower pot that has a hole at the bottom, and you take it away from a place in which it can I think it's supposed to be draw. I'm sorry. But I spell checked everything. Draw nourishment and putting it instead of pitting it down where it cannot do so. So anything that, if you're removing one thing, putting it in another area that will affect the growth process, it's almost as if it has a hole at the bottom of the planter, and it's connected to the ground, it's taking in something, nutrients, right? So you're taking it and then you've removed it from the original source. So now we get into a lot of practical halachic applications. The first one is if you're removing an avocado pit from water that has produced roots. Now, why would you do that? I don't know. But there are plenty of people, I guess, that do that. So this is based off Shemirat Shabbat Kehilta, the halachic source for observance of Shabbat. Removing a fish from water, since this is its place of growth. Fishing. Taking honey from a beehive. Of course, I don't know who, again, if you're not trained to do that, why you would do that. But for the Shulchan Aruch, smelling of fruit while it is attached to a tree. Now, why would you do that? Here, it's something that it's a fence. Why? Because your temptation would be to grab it and to take it. Well, if the flowers are detached, then it's not an issue. This is a very basic introduction. There's much more, as I said. Yeah, but if you were to remove a flower, that would be problematic because you're cutting. It's. Well, but it is harvest. Yes, the removal is the primary melacha, the av melacha. Yeah. So then, see. Okay. And then if we look at using a tree is prohibited. Now taking an already fallen fruit is prohibited, and this is, you could say, if you want to say a fence law, to prevent a person from removing more fruit because, hey, you have a friend, something like that, you don't want to pick more fruit. That's based off the Shulchan Aruch. And this is really, this is halacha. Using a tree is prohibited to prevent the possibility of breaking a tree branch. So let's say that you have a hammock. That would be something that would be prohibited. That's from the Shemirat Shabbat Kehilta. Leaning on a tree with his or her full weight is prohibited if the tree is small and may lean. That's from the Mishnah Berurah. So if you have a small tree and that's something that might actually happen. It's interesting, our tree in our backyard, we have a peach tree. And the peach tree died, and it's almost at the point of falling over. Next one, sitting on a tree is prohibited as it is related to using a tree. Yes. Climbing trees would be considered using the tree. It's a tree stump, but I'm talking about a regular tree. Yeah. Yeah, because if you climb the tree and you break the branch, then you've harvested effectively. Yeah. All right, so walking on grass is what we talked about at the beginning is permitted, but running on grass is not, since it may uproot grass, and then we have sort of an unintentional harvesting or preparing, or it's related back to the previous melacha, which is preparing the ground for planting. This is interesting. I think most people don't think about this. Riding an animal is prohibited not because of the animal itself in this particular malacha, but because most people, if you think about it, if you're back to my donkey story, you would have had a stick or something that you would have used to motivate the donkey to move along. And so the Shulchan Aruch says, you don't want to do that because you might break the stick. So sometimes the melachot... Well, yeah, but it's interesting that every malacha sort of stands on its own. So that malacha is related to that particular issue. So this is just on Shabbat. Yeah. This is on Shabbat. this is on Shabbat in Orthodox settings, or whatever level of observance a person has. All right, imur. It's from the word imar, which is to gather together. So of course these are bundles of hay or whatever that is. The principle of the malacha is gathering harvest to produce or produce in one pile. And again, in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, the relationship to this was that the dyes that were used in the Mishkan were gathered together in bunches after the harvest. And then the Ab Melacha is gathering harvested grain and then putting it in one place. We take it from its place of growth and then we transfer it to somewhere else. So the toladot or the tolados is sort of odd in this sense. But let's say that we are taking dried fruits, such as figs, and we're putting it in one mass. This prohibition applies even when it is done in the home, because we don't want to do anything that is similar to the prohibition. It's from the Mishnah Berurah. And halachic applications, you have scattered fruit in the garden or field, should not be gathered together since it appears to be the place of growth. If it's on the floor, on the ground, you don't want to move it from that place. One may, however, gather fruit and vegetables that's scattered in the house, since they are not typically gathered in the house, into bundles. And even you can even place peanuts and other items in bags to throw at a chatan, a bridegroom, on Shabbat before his wedding. So, for example, if for bar mitzvahs, I'm sure you've seen some people throw candy and things like that. That would be a sort of a similar case that you could do that. You can. Yeah, if you can do that, yes. So if it's scattered and you have fruit all over, you can put it together. It's sufficiently different from the source. So disha. So now what this depicts is you've gathered your grain, and now they're beating it because they want to separate the wheat and the chaff. So old style. Brush. So the principle of this malacha is breaking the physical connection between the desired and the undesired parts of the whole. In the Mishkan, again, back to the plants that were used to prepare dyes, they were separated from the rest of the plants that were gathered. So the principle, the Av Melacha, the principle of malacha is using a utensil to separate the desired part from the undesired part. An example of this would be a garlic press to separate the usable part of the garlic from the shell. Now there are exceptions, however. Separating the desired part from the undesired part by hand, when this is the standard method of separation, but there are exceptions, as we'll look at in a second. For example, with nuts. If you want to eat nuts, you can actually crush the nut as long as you're doing it one at a time, and it's for immediate consumption. Yes. Bananas, it's different. Yeah. So you would never. It's different because those are already. I guess you could say they're already in full form. So that's sort of the wheat is enveloped and mixed with chaff and so forth. But you can never, I'm trying to find like the right explanation for that. But it doesn't apply to bananas or to fruit. Yes, yeah. So milking a cow actually is something that is prohibited because it separates the milk from the animal. That's a personal problem. It's a personal problem for the cow. I don't know. We didn't study agriculture in the yeshiva at that level. Well, but I think, I mean, don't the baby cows drink the milk, right? I don't think in most contexts that was the case. I don't think that was the case in most. I mean, if you're a small farmer, you're going to have multiple cows. That would, I'd have to look at. Well, then you have other concerns by using a machine. You have use electricity. You have all the other prohibitions. So that's a question that we can look up. Huh? Well, it would be interesting to find out what they do, but that would be different from as it relates to halacha. So squeezing, now this is something that most people don't know, squeezing water out of a cloth for the sake of the water. And this actually becomes an issue when you're washing dishes. So there are actually specific types of washcloths or wash utensils that are often recommended, like silicone type, so that they don't absorb, which is another halacha. Well, brush, yeah, there's also like a plain one that's like a circle. It's just like one piece instead of using like exactly even steel wool. Squeezing by hand or utensil olives or grapes to make oil and wine, since that is separating juice from the fruit. So that should be pretty obvious. But it's different for juice and olives than it is for something like orange or something like that. Okay, so let's look at. Now we get into more examples. These are, practical examples. I referenced cracking nuts, but let's look at almonds. Certain types of almonds, green almonds, have a green peel around the regular shell. One may not remove this peel unless it is removed along with the shell when the almond is cracked. And this is from the Rabbi Moses Isserles and the Mishnah Berurah. For the most part, it's permissible to eat nuts, as I mentioned. Even though the physical connection between the desired and undesired parts is broken immediately before they are eaten. But the fact that you're eating it specifically, you're cracking and you're eating, that's what characterizes it as an exception. The exception comes about because this is not the standard method of disha, which involves long-term storage. So you're eating it for immediate consumption, and then it also adds, the Mishnah Berurah adds that the nuts are also cracked one at a time. All right, so this is a couple more examples. Halachic application, squeezing juice into a cup. It is forbidden to squeeze the juice of any fruit into an empty vessel. The prohibition applies to squeezing by hand as well. It also applies to squeezing lemons, despite the fact that lemon juice is not typically drunk in an unmixed form. And that's also from the Mishnah Berurah. It is permitted to squeeze juice from a fruit directly onto food if the juice is absorbed by the solid food. So if you're eating fish or steak or something like that, you cut your lemon and you put it over the steak or whatever, fish, it's fine because it's not considered separate. You're taking it from a solid form and then you're putting it onto another solid form. It is as if the solid had been squeezed into another solid. The juice may be squeezed directly onto the food. I think I haven't heard any, I don't think there's any deviation. So cutting a grapefruit. Grapefruit may be cut in half and eaten normally, even though the juice will ultimately be squeezed. This is permitted since the primary goal is the entire fruit and not simply the juice. Yeah, that applies also to grapes. I think that's the next one. Only squeezing grapes. Well, the one that's an exception is the grape, because you can make wine. So there's a concern there, even though you're not fermenting it and so forth. But only squeezing grapes presents a direct Torah prohibition. All of the other ones are secondary, if you want to. That one I don't know, to be honest. I think it's directly making wine. It may have been used in the Mishkan. There were korbanot, the sacrifices and so forth. Consequently, one may not hold a grape and attempt to suck out. Sorry about that. Out the juice without eating the grape. In contrast, one may hold an orange and suck out the juice. Because, yes, you can put it in your mouth. You can suck it in your mouth. Just don't try to hold it, Yeah, that's from the Shulchan Aruch. Ice cubes, one may put ice cubes in his or her drink on Shabbat. This despite the fact that the ice will melt into the liquid. This is acceptable because liquid is not considered as an independent entity. And this is an example of an olive press. Of course, old style. That's a practical application of Disha. And then you can also look at, treading grapes. They would put grapes and people would step on them with their feet. And that's another application of that. Let's see how much more we have. I think we can stop at Disha maybe, and then do continue on with Zuriya. So Disha, this is we'll stop there if that's all right. This is where I was talking about washing dishes. Using a wet cloth. Many will not. Maybe some do. But using a wet cloth for cleaning dishes involves the tolada of Disha. This prevents the use of cloth, sponge, Scotch-Brite, steel wool, since the water is absorbed between the fibers. You can use one if it doesn't have a lot of liquid on it. There's some that are sort of dry. They're not dry, but they're moist, but it doesn't spread out liquid. So that's where you get around that. For the towelette. Since water is absorbed between the fibers, squeezed out to aid in the washing. A loosely woven plastic scrubber is permitted, however. I was thinking about putting an example of some silicone ones that I found. I might add that for future reference for people looking back at this. Because there's some that are specifically designed to not have these issues. And then wet towelettes, the way to get around that, again, is if you have some that don't have a lot of moisture. They have some moisture, but they're not, if you squeeze it out, it's not going to. It's Disha. Well, it's we're separating one thing from another. Yeah. Because to the temple? Oh, because we were separating the plants from other plants that were going to be used in the dyeing process. So it's separating one thing from another. So if you're separating the juice from a grape, if you're separating the juice or the oil from an olive, if you're separating water from the towel, anything like that. It's all about separation. You're separating the nut from the shell, but you're eating the nut at that point, and it's fine. Okay? And so, let me just look real quick. Oh, yeah. So we looked at that. And squeezing hair. Huh?
Squeezing water from hair.
I'm sorry? I can't. Yeah, I mean, there are different elements that are involved. So here we're only dealing with the category of you've got water in your hair and you're doing the.
Basically, she said she can't shower.
Oh, I mean, people have to do what
They shower right before Shabbat.
But there's also other issues. If that are non-related, if you're showering, you should not be using hot water, according to most opinions. You can take a cold shower. But there are some people say, well, is it? Yeah. So there are different issues of concern. So, and then how are you applying soap? Is it something that's a soft, scrubber? I mean, there's a lot of different issues there. So. That's a stricter approach.
Well, here's a very an example. One parent, right? So there were different opinions regarding carrying one child. on Shabbat, it's not just Arabic. So it's not only with an Arabic, or if it's not an Arabic, you want to show me the tired or something. Stay there. So there are a lot of different opinions about that in Judaism. But there was one historical opinion that said that there were no children carried on Shabbat in order to go to Mishkan. So basically saying, it doesn't matter because you didn't have to carry children on Shabbat. So Mishkan was nothing to do with any quote that would move without pregnant to go to Mishkan. So he used that. It's a minority opinion. It is historical. It has backing. It has backing.
Well, I would say that this is not Hasidic Judaism. It would be what we would call, Haredi, modern Orthodox. The modern Orthodox is problematic because there's so many different facets to that. But if somebody, this is nothing abnormal that you would find in, if you're going Shari Tefillah, if you're going to Hortorah, Magen David, any of these places here in Dallas, this is, they're going to be doing that. This is normative.
But if you were to say somebody else's, this is normal.
You just wanted, Rabbi's giving us the normal. No, it's not talking about here. If you visit somewhere else, you kind of want to get along with
I'll give you. I had a discussion. I mean, Stephen and I were talking about. This is another melacha about tearing toilet paper on Shabbat, and he was telling me that he tears it with his mouth or something like that, or his teeth. I'm just joking. Just joking. But I said, listen, when my sister came over to spend time with me on Shabbat and stayed at my house, I had Kleenex. Everything was separated. Everything was done because, this is my sister, and this is something that, So, I had everything ready. I unscrewed the light in the refrigerator. Everything was set up. So if you don't know these things, at the very minimum, you cannot be sensitive to people in your family, to your friends, or someone who adheres to that perspective. So whatever you hold individually, that's between you and Hashem. But you have to understand different communities have different standards, and it doesn't mean that they're illegitimate, but you need to know what those are. And so it's something that you should know. This is part of a traditional Jewish education. So whatever you do with them or not, you should know the basics. Yeah, and these are basics, to be quite honest. So, as you're rubbing the ground with your foot, drying your hair, pulling apples from trees. Mm-hmm.
On Shabbat, and my father rabbi and my brother rabbi, they both agreed that as long as you're opening it, carrying it for consumption or Shabbat, then it's okay. Is that a common understanding, or is that?
I think that I believe that there would be Ashkenazim that would be stricter about that. No, I think I've heard that before. I think.
because they'd open cans of potatoes.
So we'll stop there, but we have 39 categories to go through. It's quite a bit. And then if we want in the future, we can actually look at other aspects of Shabbat observance that are not directly related to the melachot. They're more in terms of what I would call practical observance as related to davening, kiddush, things of that nature that may or may not be familiar with. So, all right, so we'll stop there, and you need to stop it. No, you need to stop it.